In this episode of The Art of Seeing, Douglas fir trees.
And everybody all around, sing along and let your voice be heard. You gotta let it out once in a while. You never know until you try. Why not now?
Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about Douglas fir trees. It's something that we teach in our studios all the time. It's just what you would recognize as being your stereotypical fir tree that we all know and recognize in the Pacific Northwest. Now clearly we have a lot of other types of trees than just Douglas fir trees. We have nobles, we have cedars, we have spruce trees, hemlock, pine trees. We have a lot of different kinds of trees in the Pacific Northwest. But the one that's really very recognizable, fairly easy to paint, is our basic Douglas fir tree. It's what a lot of people recognize as being old growth timber. It's also what the logging industry up here was totally built on harvesting. So what we really need to do though is break down what they look like. Now a lot of us have this idea of what a tree looks like, and it comes from when we were kids and we would draw Christmas trees and we kind of get this nice little cartoony look in our head, and we want to recreate that because that's what we default to, something we know. But now we need to start thinking about, what does it really look like? Have you spent a lot of time actually looking at a Douglas fir tree to know what it looks like? Probably not. I do on a regular basis because I make my living as an artist. So let's get into it. I've got a great picture I downloaded from pexels.com, and I'm going to put a little link to the a little credit for the photographer in the description here. But let's take a look at this picture. I love this picture because it's got a nice amount of fog interlaced with the trees, and we can see different layers, and it really helps some of the trees stand out. It also gives us an opportunity to see how trees that are a little bit further away don't necessarily need a lot of detail when we go into the studio and start to paint. Well, let's take a look at these trees real quick. I've got a couple in this picture that I really like a lot. They really stand out, and they really give us the idea of what the tree looks like and what it can look like. This one right here is probably my favorite one in this picture. And the reason is it's not perfect. It's got some unbalance to it, and that's good. That's what we want to see in trees. It's very rare to find a tree that looks perfect, meaning every branch is counterbalanced and spaced and all of these different things. So let's take a look at this tree and see what we've got. We have our trunk that runs straight down the middle, and trees lean a little bit. You can kind of see a little bit of variation in some of the trees here. And then when we look at the branches, what we look at is what kind of a taper do we have to create our silhouette. So if I look at this and I think of this as being a clock face, and this is the center of my clock right here at the top of the tree. If I were to basically have a long clock hand coming down, this one's going to come down to about 5 o'clock. Then we've got the middle of our trunk, which is about 6 o'clock. And then we've got the other side, which is about 7 o'clock. So I'm going to call this tree a 5 to 7. I'm going to start using that term in the studio because it makes a lot of sense to me. It's a 5 to 7 tree. So we've got our basic taper, 5 to 7. Now let's take a look at what direction the branches go in. If I look at this branch right here, it's really pretty distinctive for me. It pretty much goes fairly flat, but tapers, it goes up just a little bit. And the others over here, you can see they kind of start a little bit, they don't really come down, but mostly horizontal, and then just kind of reach up for some sunlight out of the tips. And that's kind of like a really nice basic shape. You paint that and people understand what they're looking at. If we look in the background, we'll see we've kind of got some shadows of trees here, but really all we see is that taper. We see that 5 to 7 taper right here where it's just a shadow, but because we've got the detail from this tree, our eye picks up that taper here and recognizes that we see this other taper up here, and even though it doesn't have a lot of detail, we recognize it for what it is. So what's the beauty of painting is we don't necessarily need to detail everything. Now I've got another type of tree right here. It's much fuller. I'm going to guess that's probably more of a spruce tree. They tend to be a little bit more full like that. not quite as tall as well, so that makes a lot of sense to me. This one right here maybe looks like a cedar. But let's get into this fir tree right here, and I think we'll also look at the one that's right next to it because it's a little bit different. It's this one right here. It's a little bit different, but it's still basically the same taper, about the same height, but you can see it's got a much fuller amount of tree branches. So let's put a piece of tracing paper on our iPad here, and my iPad just decided to turn off. There, it's back. All right, so I want to just basically give myself a real rough sketch. Now, sketching is something that should be part of your daily routine if you're really wanting to learn. You don't have to spend a lot of time, a couple minutes a day, but if you really want to learn how to paint landscapes, get yourself a sketchbook, get a pencil, get a piece of chalk, piece of charcoal, crayons work, colored pencils. I like colored pencils work good. I really like this nice soft graphite pencil for doing this. But practice. And you don't need to draw details. I don't want you to work on drawing details. I want you to just get the basic shapes of what we're looking at. Basic shapes which we can look at and be like, okay, I'm getting the basic idea of this branch, and I'm getting the basic idea of this branch. That's all we want right now. This is how we start to train ourselves. Now this tree over here, I can, through the tracing paper, I really can't see the branches, so I'm just going to go ahead and sketch out my basic shape. I can see a little branch right there. Again, I've got that nice 5 to 7 taper here. And you'll notice we don't really see these trees, the base of them, the trunks. If you get further down in these trees, you go out in the woods, you go hiking, and you'll notice that the trunks go all the way to the ground and there's a gap. But the other tops of the tops of the other trees kind of fill in that gap, so we don't see them just floating unless you've got an area like right now, some of the areas of the gorge after the fire that we had a couple years ago, you can see some of these trees that are sitting up on the ridge, and you can see them all the way down to the ground. So you can see that space where there's branches that have broken off and just aren't there. You've just got a lot of trunk between the canopy. But let's go ahead and take this. I'm going to move the iPad out of the way. Here, I'll point it out what I was talking about. This tree just kind of disappears into the other trees, and we don't really see where they connect with the ground. They kind of just connect into that dark mass. I really like this a lot. Now, let's talk about this shape. I've sketched it. You can see we've been teaching trees during our Go Box videos. But let's take this other pen. This is a brush tip pen. And let's just give ourselves a quick little idea of what this looks like. So it's fairly skinny at the top, gets fatter. And this, I'm just going to pretend that just keeps going down. But we're just going to kind of mimic those guideline shapes that we've got. I'm not trying to make this perfect. I'm just kind of trying to give a suggestion of what we were looking at earlier. We know we've got some branches in the middle here. A lot of times we forget that there's branches that come towards us and move away from us, and we have a tendency of just only wanting to do the branches that go left to right. And that doesn't end up looking very good. It kind of looks like a ladder. So I just kind of start filling this in, and this is nice. We've kind of used a photo of a real tree to train ourselves how trees look. And you can do this too. If you don't have the time or ability to get out into the forest with a sketchbook and sit down and actually spend time sketching these things, by all means, look something up online, grab a piece of paper, grab a pencil, grab a crayon, whatever you've got available. Grab a paintbrush. Paintbrush is a little bit messier on paper, but it'll work. Okay, so here I've got a nice basic shape, and I think if you were to show anybody this basic shape, they would recognize, hey, this is a fir tree. Got it. No problem. All right, now this other one, I just kind of got a little chunky in here. It's disappearing off into the other trees. I just kind of mess it up like that. Now this other one is a little bit fuller, and looking at the photograph, I can still see it on my iPad over there. It's not quite as full as the way I sketched it, but it's pretty close. So let's just sketch this one in. I didn't even go with the trunk because I'm just going for the silhouette. And a lot of times that's a good way to paint a tree or to draw a tree, is to not worry about the trunk so much and then come back later and put the trunk in. The trunk's always there, but I think it really encourages us to just, I'll show you in just a second, it really encourages us to just kind of paste the branches on the sides of the trees. And if we draw a trunk, a lot of times we get this trunk and it's really just encourages us to do this, which that really doesn't, it looks like a telephone pole, and that's not exactly what we're going for. So this is a good representation here. So there we go. We've looked at it. What we've found is that Douglas fir trees have a trunk that's pretty tall and straight. It's a single trunk. Some trees have double trunks, but this is just a single trunk tree. The branches start out fairly horizontal, and then they reach up for the sky just a little bit as they get out towards the end. And they come all the way down and disappear into the canopy of what we're painting. Now, sometimes we have a tree where it's standing alone, like on a riverbank or something like that. But usually when a tree is small, its branches do go all the way to the ground. If you've ever been out to a Christmas tree farm to cut a tree down, you know what I'm talking about. You got to get down right on the ground and cut it off. So anyway, I think that's enough for tonight. Get a sketchbook, get out there, get drawing. I'll see you next time on The Art of Seeing.